The solitary farmer was still a virgin at 57, until a young woman, soaked to the bone, knocked at his door asking for shelter from the storm. Imagine a man who lived more than half a century without ever knowing a woman's touch, not because opportunity never came, but because he carried on his shoulders the weight of a past that refused to let him go. Think of what it must be like to awaken to love when the heart has grown accustomed to loneliness, when calloused hands have known only hard labor and never the softness of a caress. What kind of transformation is born when a tired soul finds redemption in the middle of a storm? This is the story of Philemon Graves, a solitary farmer of 57, and Isolde Mariner, the young woman who arrived drenched in rain to forever change the fate of them both. If you are moved by stories of true love, of souls finding each other when they least expect, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stirring narratives like this one. Just about to begin. The skies broke open that October night in 1847 over the rolling hills of Appalachia, as though heaven itself had torn down its dams at once. Rain drummed against the shingled roof of the lonely farmhouse that rose like a silent fortress amid endless fields. Within its walls of oak and stone lived Philemon Graves, a man who had learned to speak only with the wind and his own shadows. At 57, Philemon carried on his broad, stooped shoulders the weight of a life spent in sacrifice. His beard, thick and grey as morning fog, framed a face carved by storms and years of solitary work. His hands, rough as old hickory roots, knew every kind of soil, every texture of timber, every heft of a tool, yet had never known the softness of a woman's skin. It was not for lack of chance. On the rare occasions he came down to the nearest town to buy provisions or sell his produce, widows and unmarried women cast curious glances his way. They whispered about the mysterious farmer, who lived alone on the property he had inherited, speculating about his reclusive ways and his reasons for living celibate. But Philemon would always tug his straw hat lower and keep walking, carrying on his back an invisible burden no one could decipher. The truth was, Philemon had made a vow, a silent promise whispered to the heavens the night he buried the last. Of his 6 younger brothers, victims of the typhoid fever that had ravaged the county 2 decades earlier, he, the eldest, had survived to tend the land, to keep alive the memory of the Graves family, to carry alone the weight of 6 lives cut short. There was no room for personal happiness when 6 headstones in the family plot reminded him daily of his duty. On that stormy night, Philemon followed his usual routine. He had just finished splitting wood for the approaching winter, and now warmed himself by the iron stove, reading under the glow of a kerosene lamp the only letter he had received that month, a formal notice from the bank regarding land taxes. His trembling hands were not from age, but from the gnawing solitude eating at him inside, like termites in dry wood. The silence of the house was broken only by the crackle of burning logs and the relentless pounding of rain on the roof. Now and then the wind howled through the gaps in the ill-fitted windows, carrying with it the damp scent of wet earth and decaying autumn leaves. It was a smell Philemon knew well, the scent of melancholy, of time passing without change, of seasons repeating in their monotonous cycle of planting, harvest and rest. Then he heard it. 3 knocks against the heavy wooden door, faint, nearly swallowed by the storm, yet distinct enough to make him lift his head from the yellowed paper. Philemon froze for a moment, wondering if his weary ears had deceived him. Who would travel on a night like this? Who would even know the path to his isolated homestead? The knocks came again, more urgent this time. Philemon rose slowly, his joints protesting after a long day of toil. He approached the door with cautious steps, his hand hesitant on the wrought iron latch. He hadn't received a visitor in months. The last to cross his threshold had been Father Ambrose, who came once a year to bless the family graves. When he finally opened the door, Philemon felt as though the ground gave way beneath him. There stood a young woman, soaked from head to toe, shivering in the downpour. Her dark hair clung to her face, framing delicate features glistening under the lamplight. A plain cotton dress, colourless in the shadows, clung tightly to her slender figure, and her bare feet pressed into the mud pooling at the threshold. But it was her eyes that struck Philemon most, large dark eyes that shone with a mixture of desperation and resolve. Eyes that seemed to hold untold stories, guarded secrets, silenced pain. She looked at him with an intensity that stripped him bare, as if she could see past his bristled beard and coarse clothes straight into his lonely soul. "Please, sir," she murmured, her voice nearly lost to the roar of the storm. "I need shelter, just until the rain lets up." Philemon stood frozen in the doorway, the axe still in his great hands, unsure how to respond to such an apparition. In over 2 decades of solitude, no woman had crossed his threshold. He did not know how to act, what words to use, what gestures to make. He felt like a wild creature facing a being from another world, fascinated and afraid all at once. The young woman tilted her head, raindrops streaming down her pale face. "I won't cause you trouble, I promise. I know it's bold to ask this of a stranger, but—" Her voice faltered slightly. "I have nowhere else to go." Those last words pierced Philemon's heart like a blade. He knew too well the feeling of having nowhere to go, not in the physical sense, but in the soul. For years he had felt lost in his own home, wandering like a ghost among dust-covered furniture and fading memories. "Come in," he said at last, his voice hoarse after hours of silence. He stepped back awkwardly, motioning for her to enter. The young woman hesitated a moment, as though weighing the risk of accepting shelter from this imposing, unknown man. Then, with a sigh of relief, she crossed the threshold and stepped into the warm, fire-lit house. Philemon set the axe against the wall and watched as she looked around with quiet curiosity. The house was plain but well kept. Dark, polished wood, furniture, whitewashed walls, wide pine floors scrubbed and waxed clean. Decorations were scarce. A wooden cross above the hearth, a few yellowed photographs in simple frames, and a small shelf holding 6 worn books. "You need to get dry," he muttered, disappearing for a moment into a side room. He returned, with a thick wool blanket, fresh and carrying the faint scent of lavender. "If you hang your clothes by the stove there, they'll be dry by morning." She accepted the blanket with a shy smile. "Thank you, sir." "Philemon," he answered, lowering his eyes. "Philemon Graves." "I'm Isolde," she said, wrapping herself in the blanket. "Isolde Mariner." Her name sounded refined, almost aristocratic, a sharp contrast to her ragged appearance and the desperate circumstances that had brought her here. Philemon noticed she gave no further details about herself, where she came from, why she was traveling alone on a stormy night, why she claimed to have nowhere else to go. He prepared chamomile tea in a blackened kettle while she changed behind, a makeshift screen of hung sheets, the soft rustle of fabric, the delicate shadow cast on the wall by the lamplight. It awakened in Philemon feelings long buried. He felt like an inexperienced boy again, nervous and clumsy, his hands trembling as he poured hot water over the dried herbs. When Isolde reappeared, wrapped in the blanket like a robe, Philemon nearly dropped the china cup. Her damp hair had been loosened, falling in dark waves over her shoulders. Without the barrier of soaked clothes, he saw she was even younger than he'd imagined, perhaps 25, 30 at most. There was a natural beauty in her face, a simple grace that needed no adornment. They sat at the rough wooden table, she sipping the tea with delicate hands that contrasted with his large, calloused ones. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence born when two people instinctively recognize the other's loneliness. "How long have you lived here alone?" she asked at last, her eyes wandering over the details that betrayed a solitary life. Only one plate, one cup, one chair more worn than the rest. 22 years, Philemon answered, surprising himself with his honesty. Normally he avoided speaking about his personal life. He stopped, unable to continue. "Since you lost someone important," she finished gently. He looked up at her, startled by her insight. "I lost everyone," he murmured. "Parents, brothers, all of them." Isolde stretched out her hand across the table, stopping just short of his. She didn't touch him, but the gesture alone was enough to send a strange warmth spreading through his chest. "I'm sorry," she said, and there was such sincerity in her voice that he almost believed she truly understood his pain. Outside, the rain still hammered down, but inside the house something different was taking shape. For the first time in decades, Philemon didn't feel utterly alone. Isolde's presence filled the empty corners like soft incense, bringing life to the silent furniture and color to the faded walls. If you are moved by stories of true love, souls finding one another when least expected, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stirring tales like this one. The days that followed passed like a strange, luminous dream in Philemon's life. Isolde spoke nothing of leaving, and he had no courage to ask about her plans. She simply folded herself into the farm's routine, as though she had always belonged there, as if the storm had delivered her not by chance, but by fate. In the mornings, Philemon awoke to the aroma of fresh coffee and homemade bread, luxuries he had long abandoned as unnecessary for a solitary man. Isolde rose before dawn and was already in the kitchen when he came down, her hair tied back in a simple bun, wearing one of her dresses she had washed and mended with impressive skill. "Good morning," she'd say with a soft smile, handing him a steaming cup. "Good morning," he replied, still unused to the idea of having someone to exchange greetings with at daybreak. She naturally assumed small household tasks he had long neglected. She swept the floors, organized furniture, washed his few clothes with a gentleness that contrasted with the rough way he handled things. Yet she did it without intrusion, never overstepping. She seemed to understand it was his house, that she was only a guest, and moved through the rooms with the lightness of a respectful shadow. Philemon, in turn, tried to keep to his usual routines, but found her presence transformed even the most mundane chores. When he went to feed the hogs, he knew she'd be watching from the kitchen window with quiet curiosity. When he split wood in the yard, he felt stronger, more vigorous, as though he wanted to impress her with his endurance and skill. She showed genuine interest in his work, asking about planting, tending livestock, the techniques he had learned from his father. Philemon, who for years had spoken only to himself, discovered he enjoyed teaching, sharing knowledge he had thought useless to anyone else. Just as a plant blooms when it finds the right soil, sometimes it takes the right person for us to rediscover who we truly are. If you want to follow this touching transformation, subscribe to the channel. We promise more stories like this one will move and inspire you. "Why did you choose to live so isolated?" she asked one afternoon, while helping him mend a broken fence. Philemon stayed silent for a long moment, hammering nails into the wood harder than necessary. "I didn't choose," he said at last. "Circumstance chose for me." "And if circumstance were to change?" she pressed gently. "If life offered you a second chance?" He froze, the hammer raised, and looked at her. There was something in her dark eyes that made him feel both vulnerable and hopeful. "I don't know if I'd know what to do with a second chance," he admitted. "Maybe it isn't about knowing," she said, touching his rough hand lightly. "Maybe it's about trusting." That night, after their usual frugal supper, which she had somehow transformed into a flavorful meal with wild herbs gathered from the edges of the property, Philemon found himself telling stories from his childhood. He spoke of his stern but fair father, his mother who had died too soon, and the brothers who once filled the house with laughter before sickness took them one by one. Isolde listened in silence, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on his face as he resurrected. Memories long buried with his family. Now and then she asked a question or offered a comment that revealed a deep understanding of loss and loneliness. "And you?" he asked at last, gathering his courage. "Where did you come from? Why were you alone that night?" Isolde's face closed slightly, like a flower retreating from touch. "I lost people too," she said. "And I discovered that sometimes you have to run from what wounds you to find what might heal you." Philemon didn't press her. He respected secrets. He carried many himself. But he noticed in the way her eyes turned aside when speaking of the past, in the faint tension that took her shoulders when strange noises broke the night, that she wasn't merely seeking shelter. She was running from something or someone. In the days that followed, a comfortable routine formed between them. They worked side by side during the day, each respecting the other's space. They shared meals in friendly silence or in light conversation about the weather, the animals, the small garden she had started beside the house. Yet there were moments charged with something more. The accidental brush of their hands when passing an object, their eyes meeting and holding just a fraction longer than necessary, silences heavy with unspoken meaning. Philemon felt like a man waking after decades of hibernation. His body, hardened by labor but never softened by affection, began responding to stimuli he had long forgotten. The faint fragrance of Isolde's hair as she passed by him, the rhythm of her breathing in the next room at night, the sight of her, delicate hands tending plants or mending clothes, all awakened sensations he thought lost forever. It was on the 10th day of her presence that Philemon found her silently weeping in the small family graveyard on the hill behind the house. She knelt before the wooden cross marking his mother's resting place, her hands clasped in her lap, tears slipping down her cheeks, reddened by the cold morning wind. Philemon approached cautiously, unsure whether to intrude upon her grief. There was something sacred in the way she cried, not desperate or hysterical, but a profound, serene sadness rising from deep within her soul. "Forgive me," she whispered when she noticed him. "I didn't mean to intrude. It's been so long since I've seen graves cared for with such tenderness." Her words broke unevenly. "My parents were buried in a mass pit. No headstones, nothing." Philemon's heart clenched. He knelt beside her, his large hands brushing the earth that covered his kin. "How did they die?" he asked gently. "Cholera," she answered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "In an epidemic that swept through our town 3 years ago, I survived only because I was visiting an aunt in another county. When I returned," her voice collapsed entirely. "There was nothing left. No house, no family, no place for me." Philemon then understood why she had appeared at his door like a soul lost in the storm. They were two creatures scarred by the same kind of loss, two orphans of fate who had found in each other a reflection of their own loneliness. "And afterward?" he asked, offering her a clean handkerchief pulled from his shirt pocket. "I lived with distant relatives who saw me as a burden," she continued, taking the cloth with gratitude. "They tried to marry me off to a man 3 times my age, a widower cold as stone, said it was my only chance, that an orphan had no right to choose." Her eyes hardened. "I ran away on the night of the wedding. Since then I've drifted from town to town, working where I could, sleeping where I was allowed." Philemon felt a quiet rage rising in his chest. How could anyone treat such a fragile soul with such cruelty? How could they try to force her into an unwanted marriage after all she had suffered? "You're safe here," he said, startled by the firmness in his own voice. "For as long as you wish to stay, this house is yours too." Isolde looked at him with such surprise and gratitude, it nearly unmanned him. "But I can't accept your kindness forever," she protested. "You've already done too much for me." "It isn't kindness," he replied. "It's relief. For so long this house has felt like a tomb. You've brought it back to life. You've brought me back to life." They remained in silence for a long moment, kneeling among the graves, two wounded souls recognizing in each other the possibility of healing. The wind whispered through the trees surrounding the graveyard, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. "You know something strange?" Isolde said finally. "Since I came here, I don't dream nightmares anymore. For the first time in 3 years, I sleep in peace." Philemon, too, had noticed changes in himself. He no longer woke, gasping in the night, no longer felt the crushing weight of solitude when silence lingered too long. Her presence was a balm over old wounds he had thought incurable. That afternoon, they worked side by side in the garden she had begun. Philemon watched in fascination as she treated the fragile plants with tenderness, whispering encouragement as she watered each seedling with motherly care. "My mother used to say plants can feel when they're loved," she explained, catching his gaze. "That they grow stronger when tended with kindness. And do you believe that?" he asked. Isolde smiled, a true smile that lit her entire face. "Just look at them. In 10 days they've grown more than I ever expected. I think it's not only plants that respond to love." Philemon felt his face grow warm. It had been years since he'd received a compliment so subtle yet so direct. All his adult life, he had convinced himself that he was too rough, too plain, too unworthy to stir affection in any woman. But the way Isolde looked at him, the way she spoke to him, The way she smiled in his presence made him question those long-held certainties. That evening after supper, she asked to see the old photographs. He kept tucked away in a desk drawer. Philemon hesitated. They were painful images, portraits of a family that no longer existed. But something in the gentleness of her request persuaded him to share that bittersweet treasure. They sat close together on the parlor sofa, she leafing carefully through the yellowed photographs as he explained who each person was. There were portraits of his parents in their youth, his brothers at different ages, snapshots of joy that memory had preserved like sacred relics. "You look so much like your mother," she observed, pointing to a picture where a soft-featured woman cradled a baby in her arms. "That same kindness in the eyes. No one's ever told me that before," he murmured, moved. "Then no one's ever really looked at you closely enough," she replied, her fingers brushing the edge of the photograph. It was in that moment Philemon realized he was in love. It wasn't just gratitude for her company, nor simple physical attraction. It was something deeper, more transformative, the recognition of a soulmate, someone who understood his pain, because she carried her own, someone who saw beauty where he had only ever seen flaws. The weeks that followed brought a subtle but profound transformation in both their lives. Philemon began paying more attention to his appearance. He trimmed his beard with greater care, wore a clean shirt each day, even found a bar of scented soap at the bottom of a chest, a relic from a time when he had still hoped for a different kind of life. Isolde, meanwhile, bloomed like the plants in her garden. The sickly pallor she had carried when she first arrived gave way to a healthy flush in her cheeks. Her hair shone, her eyes no longer shadowed by constant fear. She laughed more, spoke more, moved through the house with the confidence of someone who had finally found where she belonged. They developed little rituals that structured their days. In the morning, she made coffee while he cared for the livestock. In the afternoons, they worked together in the garden or on repairs to the house, she suggested with tact and diplomacy. In the evenings, they talked about books. She had discovered his modest library and proved to be a voracious and thoughtful reader, or simply sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in gold. It was during one of those golden afternoons that Philemon finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had tormented him for days. "Isolde," he began, his hands nervously turning a dry leaf over and over. Do you think about staying, permanently?" She stopped rocking in the chair he had mended just for her. "I would like to stay," she admitted softly, "but I don't know if it would be proper. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. Can people talk? Let them talk," he replied with a vehemence that startled her. "I don't care about the opinions of people who don't know our story." Isolde smiled, but a melancholy sadness lingered in her expression. "You say that now, but when the preacher comes and questions your reputation, when the neighbors start whispering, when nothing," he cut her off, rising from his chair and kneeling before her. "Isolde, I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. I don't know how to express it properly. I have no experience in such things, but I know I can't imagine my life without you in it." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Philemon, you hardly know me. You don't know where I truly come from, what mistakes I might have made, I know what matters," he said, taking her hands in his. "I know you are good, that you are kind, that you brought light into my darkness. I know you make me want to be a better man. And I know that whatever your past may be, it doesn't matter. What matters is what we can build together." Isolde was crying openly now, but they were tears of relief, of hope, of a love that finally allowed itself to exist. "I love you too," she whispered. "From the very first week I knew, but I was so afraid it was too late for me, that I didn't deserve a second chance at happiness." Philemon rose and gathered her into his arms, holding her with the reverence of someone cradling something sacred and fragile. It was the first time he had ever embraced a woman as a man in love, and the sensation was overwhelming. She fit against his broad chest, as if she had been made for that very place. "Marry me," he murmured into her perfumed hair. "I don't care if it's too soon, if it's improper, if people say we're mad. Marry me and make this house a true home." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed then on the porch, bathed in the glow of sunset. with the same care and reverence one would give a priceless relic. It was Philemon's first kiss at 57 and Isolde's first kiss free of fear, only pure transformative love. That night, they stayed awake late, making plans. They would wed in the little church in town as soon as possible. They would repair the house together, turning it into a true home. Perhaps even build an extra room, Isolde whispered with flushed cheeks, thinking of the children who might someday bless their union. Philemon felt reborn. For the first time since his brother's deaths, he allowed himself to dream of the future. He pictured teaching children to work the land, pictured Isolde radiant and expectant in the garden she had turned from barren soil into an explosion of color and fragrance. But not everything would be simple. The next morning, when they went down to town to buy provisions and announce their engagement, Philemon noticed the curious stares, the barely hidden whispers, the lifted brows of the women who watched them walk hand in hand. "Where did you find that girl?" asked Mrs. Caldwell, the most notorious gossip in the county, barely containing her malicious curiosity. "God brought her to me," Philemon answered simply, tightening his grip on Isolde's hand in a gesture of protection. But he saw how the comments unsettled her. On the way back home, she was quieter than usual, lost in thoughts she did not share. "What is it?" he asked once they were back at the house. "It's just... maybe they're right," Isolde murmured. "Maybe I really am unfit for you. A woman with no family, no dowry, no—" "Stop," he said firmly, taking her face in his hands. "You are exactly what I need, and I am exactly what you need. Nothing else matters." That night, they sealed their promise in the most intimate of ways. With the tenderness of someone touching flower petals, Philemon discovered the mysteries of a woman's body, while Isolde guided him with patience and love through the uncharted paths of passion. It was a sacred surrender, a mutual offering that bound two lonely souls into one shared existence. The preparations for their wedding brought a feverish joy to the secluded farm. Isolde stitched her own wedding dress on an old sewing machine she had found in the attic, while Philemon renovated the house with renewed energy, each hammer blow a declaration of love. But it was on a grey November morning that their happiness first came under threat. Philemon was repairing the roof when he saw an elegant carriage climbing the dirt road toward his property. It was no ordinary wagon, but a costly coach drawn by two well-groomed chestnut horses, with golden fittings that gleamed even beneath the dull sky. He climbed down the ladder quickly, heart pounding with a sense of dread. Isolde stepped out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her face draining of color when she recognized the carriage. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." From the coach descended a tall, well-dressed man of about 50, with a neatly trimmed grey moustache and clothing that betrayed high social standing. His eyes swept the farm with thinly veiled contempt before locking on to Isolde. "At last I've found you," he said, his voice heavy with authority and irritation. 3 months searching for you, Isolde. 3 months of embarrassment and humiliation." "Colonel Ashford," she murmured, instinctively retreating toward Philemon. "How did you find me?" "I have my ways," the man replied, striding forward with determined steps. "You owe me an explanation, young lady, and much more than that." Philemon stepped in front of her, placing his imposing frame between Isolde and the unwelcome visitor. His broad shoulders, muscled arms from years of labor, and towering height made the colonel hesitate for a brief moment. "And you are?" Philemon asked, his voice low but edged with threat. "I am Jonathan Ashford, the betrayed fiancé of this woman," the colonel answered, regaining his composure. "And you, I imagine, are the man harboring her in sin." "I am the man who is going to marry her," Philemon corrected. The colonel laughed with disdain. "Marry? My dear man, this woman is already promised to me. She fled on the eve of our wedding, shaming and dishonoring my family. I've come to take her back so she can fulfill her obligation." "I never gave my word," Isolde protested, drawing courage from Philemon's protective presence. "I was forced by my relatives. I never consented to that marriage." "Consent?" Ashford sneered. "An orphan without dowry has no luxury to consent or refuse. She ought to be grateful for the opportunity offered her." Philemon felt rage rise like molten fire. On this land she is free to choose, he said, stepping closer, and she has chosen me. Free? Ashford barked a laugh. Look around you, man. Is this your idea of freedom? A lonely farm in the middle of nowhere? I can give her a mansion in the capital, servants, carriages, imported gowns. And you, what can you offer her? Hard labor and solitude. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered in Isolde's mind. Life with Philemon would be plain, without luxuries. But she remembered the cruelty in the colonel's eyes, the stories she had heard of how he mistreated his servants and his previous wives. I can offer love, Philemon said simply, something you will never give her. Love doesn't put food on the table or pay debts, Ashford retorted. Then he shifted his tactics, addressing Isolde directly. My dear, be sensible. This man is old, rustic, unrefined. You are young. You deserve more than this primitive life. Come with me and you shall have everything a woman could desire. Except happiness, Isolde replied, surprising everyone, including herself, with the firmness in her voice. I would rather live simply with true love than in a gilded cage with a man who sees me as property. The colonel's face twisted with rage. You will regret this foolish choice, he hissed, when this man grows weary of you, when his age becomes a burden. When poverty closes in, you'll remember me, but by then it will be too late. He turned to Philemon, eyes narrowed. And you, fool, do you think you can steal what belongs to me? I have influence in this county. I can make your life very difficult. Try, Philemon said, folding his arms across his broad chest. But get off my land, now. Ashford hesitated, weighing whether it was worth confronting the formidable man before him. He chose caution, but his words dripped venom as he mounted the coach once more. This isn't over, Isolde. You owe me recompense for the humiliation you've caused, and I always collect my debts. The carriage rattled away in a cloud of dust, leaving behind a toxic sense of menace hanging in the air. Isolde collapsed into Philemon's arms, trembling like a leaf. I'm sorry, she murmured against his chest. I'm sorry for bringing trouble into your life. You haven't brought trouble, he said, stroking her hair. You've brought love, and for that love I'll face any threat. The following days were tense on the farm. Philemon kept a rifle loaded and within reach at all times. Isolde lived in constant apprehension, jumping at every strange sound, every unexpected shadow. Ashford's threat soon took form. First came small acts of sabotage, fences cut in the night, letting cattle stray into neighboring land. Then their small corn crop was trampled by horses someone had deliberately loosed. Finally came the whispers in town. Mrs. Caldwell, ever eager to spread gossip, whispered to anyone who'd listen that Isolde was a woman of questionable morals, that she had abandoned a respectable fiancé to live in sin with a rough farmer. The local preacher, swayed by the malicious chatter, even questioned Philemon about the irregular situation of their union. Either marry the girl soon or send her away, advised the clergyman. You cannot continue under the same roof without the blessing of the Lord. Philemon scheduled the wedding for the following week, but soon discovered that finding witnesses willing to sign the documents would be harder than he imagined. Colonel Ashford's influence stretched across the county, and many feared the consequences of crossing him. It was then that Isolde had an idea. What if we married just the two of us? She suggested one night as they sat on the porch, watching the stars. No pomp, no guests, just us, God, and our vow to each other. Philemon considered it. There was something profoundly romantic in the thought of an intimate ceremony, away from curious eyes and judgmental whispers. But where? He asked. She smiled, pointing toward the small family graveyard on the hill. There, in the presence of your family, they will be our witnesses. The idea touched him deeply. To marry under the silent gaze of his parents and brothers felt like the truest way to begin a new chapter. They prepared everything in secret. Isolde finished her simple yet elegant gown, sewn from white cotton with hand-stitched details. Philemon managed to purchase 2 plain gold bands from the town jeweler, paying with the savings he had set aside through years of solitary work. On the chosen morning, a clear Sunday in December, they dressed with special care. Philemon wore his best clothes, dark linen trousers, a starched white shirt, and the coat that had belonged to his father. Isolde looked radiant in her white dress, her hair loose and adorned with wildflowers picked from the garden. Hand in hand, they climbed, the hill carrying a small Bible and the rings. The family graveyard, tended lovingly by Philemon through the years, looked like a sacred garden in the golden morning light. They stood before the grave of his parents, where a wooden cross marked their eternal rest. "Mother, father," Philemon murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've brought someone to meet you, someone who has brought light back into our home." Isolde bowed her head respectfully before the graves. "I promise to care for your son," she whispered. "I promise to bring joy to the places where sadness once lingered." With no minister to officiate, they made their own vows. Philemon took Isolde's hands and spoke with the simple honesty that defined him. "Isolde, you came into my life like rain upon dry ground. You turned my house into a home, my solitude into companionship, my despair into hope. I promise to love you, protect you, and honor you for as long as God grants me breath. I promise to be the man you deserve, even if it means changing everything in myself." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she answered, "Philemon, you've shown me that true love doesn't need fancy words or grand gestures. It only needs a sincere heart and hands willing to labor for another's happiness. I promise to stand by you in joy and in hardship. I promise to make this house a place where love is cultivated like the plants in our garden, with patience, dedication, and faith in the future." They exchanged the plain rings, sealing their vows with a tender, reverent kiss. In that moment, with the wind whispering through the trees and the sun blessing their union, they felt more married than if they had held the grandest of ceremonies. They descended the hill as husband and wife, ready to face together whatever challenges lay ahead. But Colonel Ashford was not ready to accept defeat. His revenge came in a form more cruel than either of them could have imagined. 3 days after the intimate graveyard wedding, an official party arrived at the farm, the county sheriff, flanked by 2 deputies and a clerk. "Philemon Graves?" asked the sheriff, a thin man with spectacles who nervously consulted a set of papers. "I am," Philemon replied, stepping out with Isolde at his side. "I have here a warrant of search and seizure," the officer announced. "There are accusations that you are harboring a fugitive from justice." "Fugitive?" Philemon turned to Isolde, who had gone pale. The sheriff continued, "Miss Isolde Mariner is accused of theft and desertion of household. She must come with us to give account." "That's a lie," Philemon protested. "My wife has stolen." "Nothing from anyone. Wife?" The sheriff arched a brow. "There is no official record of marriage between you two. In the eyes of the law, you are living in unlawful cohabitation." Isolde stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. "It's true I fled on the eve of an arranged wedding, but I took nothing that wasn't mine by right." According to Colonel Jonathan Ashford, the sheriff read from his papers, "You left with family jewels given as an advance dowry, along with clothing and personal items he had purchased for the marriage." "I lied," Isolde whispered to Philemon. "When I fled, I did take some things he had given. I thought they were mine since they were gifts." Philemon felt the world tilt beneath him at the realization that she had withheld part of her past, but it did not lessen his love for her or his resolve to protect her. "How much is this supposed debt?" he asked the sheriff. $200, the officer replied, "a considerable sum." It was money Philemon did not have. His savings amounted to barely $50, scraped together through years of frugal living. "You could settle with the property," the sheriff suggested, consulting the papers again. "The colonel is willing to accept the farm as payment and forgive all charges if the lady returns to fulfill her marriage contract." "Never," Isolde said firmly. "I would rather be jailed than return to that man." Philemon looked at the land that had been his family's for 3 generations, then at the woman he loved more than life itself. There was no real choice. "I'll take the debt," he said. "She stays with me." "No," Isolde cried. "I won't let you lose everything because of me." "This land means nothing without you on it," he replied, taking her hands. "We can start over somewhere else." The sheriff seemed relieved not to arrest a woman who was clearly more victim than criminal. Very well. We'll allow a week to prepare the transfer documents. Until then, you may remain here. When the officials left, Isolde collapsed in tears in Philemon's arms. Forgive me, she sobbed. Forgive me for ruining your life, for making you lose your inheritance. You ruined nothing, he said, stroking her hair. You gave me a reason to live. Land can be bought, sold, lost. True love has no price. They spent that week making peace with the loss to come. They walked the property, visited every corner that had shaped Philemon's life. He told her childhood stories, showed her the trees he had planted with his father, the brook where he had fished with his brothers at the family graveyard. Philemon knelt before the tombstones and whispered a farewell. I'm leaving, but I carry you in my heart, and I carry with me someone you would have blessed. Isolde planted flowers on the graves, a silent gesture of apology for having been the cause of such a painful parting. On the night before their departure, they made love with desperate intensity, as though trying to etch every touch, every whisper, every shared heartbeat into memory. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. Where will we go, she asked. Wherever the heart leads, he answered. We have our hands, our will to work, and we have each other. That's more than many folks ever get. On the morning of their departure, they loaded an old wagon with the few possessions they could take. Clothes, a few books, basic tools, family photographs, and the seedlings from Isolde's garden carefully transplanted into makeshift pots. When Colonel Ashford arrived to take possession of the property, he found only an empty house and a note on the kitchen table. The land is yours, but the love was ours, and always will be. For weeks they traveled through the Appalachian Mountains, searching for a place where they could start anew without the weight of the past. They slept under the open sky when they had to, stopped in small towns where Philemon offered his skills as a carpenter or farmhand in exchange for food and shelter. Isolde surprised herself with her resilience. The delicate woman who had once arrived drenched on his doorstep had become a strong and determined companion, able to sleep on straw, cook over makeshift fires, and wash clothes in icy streams without complaint. Do you regret it? Philemon asked one night as they lay beneath the stars in a clearing where they had camped. Regret what? She asked, nestling against his chest. Choosing me, bringing us into this life of uncertainty. Isolde turned to face him, her eyes shining in the firelight. Philemon, for the first time in my life I chose my own path. I regret nothing, not the hardships, not the uncertainty, because I chose out of love, not convenience. It was in a small settlement in Pennsylvania that they finally found their chance. It was called Hope Hollow, a name that seemed prophetic given their circumstances. It was a newly formed community, settled by immigrants and pioneers seeking opportunities in the growing coal and farming trade. The leader of the settlement, Samuel Whitaker, was a plain but fair man who judged people by character, not by background. When Philemon and Isolde arrived, tired and dusty from the road, he welcomed them with genuine hospitality. Can you work the land? He asked without preamble. I can, Philemon replied, and my wife has a gift for plants and the kitchen. Then, you're welcome. We have good soil here, but not enough hands willing to put in the work. They were given a small plot on the edge of the settlement, virgin ground covered in brush that needed clearing. It was a beginning from nothing, but they embraced it. With renewed determination, they built their new home with their own hands, a simple wooden cabin, modest but warm. Isolde transplanted her cherished seedlings, creating a garden that soon became the envy of the other women. Philemon broke the soil for planting, working from before sunrise until after dark. Gradually, the community came to accept them. Isolde, with her gentle nature and knowledge of herbs, became a respected figure among the women. She assisted with births, tended the sick, and shared recipes and cultivation techniques. Philemon, with his strength and reliability, quickly established himself as one of the settlement's most trusted workers. But the true transformation came 6 months after their arrival, when Isolde discovered she was with child. The news came one March morning, when she woke dizzy and nauseated. The midwife of the settlement, Mrs. Thompson, confirmed her suspicions with a maternal smile. "You're expecting, my dear, and by the glow on your face, this little one will be dearly loved." Philemon received the news with uncontainable joy. At 58, he would be a father for the first time. The loss of the farm, the uncertainty of the journey, all of it became insignificant compared to the prospect of raising a family with the woman he adored. "Our child," he murmured, gently stroking Isolde's still flat belly. "The fruit of our love." The pregnancy brought a new dimension to their life together. Philemon became even more protective and attentive, anticipating Isolde's needs before she voiced them. She, in turn, bloomed with motherhood, radiating peace and happiness that lifted all those around her. Their neighbors began to see them not as the mysterious outsiders who had arrived empty-handed, but as a devoted couple who had braved hardships for the sake of love. Their story, told only in fragments, never in full, stirred sympathy and admiration. "They're an example to us all," Mrs. Thompson remarked, "proof that true love can overcome anything." By winter, their little cabin had become a true home. Isolde sewed tiny clothes for the baby expected in spring, while Philemon carved a cradle by hand from sturdy oak. They had finally found the peace they had long sought. But the past, like a lingering shadow, was not yet finished with them. On a hot December afternoon, when Isolde was 8 months along, Colonel Ashford finally found them. He arrived in hope, hollow in a black carriage, flanked by 2 armed men like a storm cloud rolling in with ruin. Philemon was working the field when he saw the party approaching the cabin. He ran harder than he ever had in his life, heart pounding with fear and fury. He reached the yard breathless, where Isolde stood in the doorway, her hands instinctively shielding her rounded belly. "So, this is where you've been hiding," Ashford said as he stepped down from the carriage with a triumphant air. "I thought you had fled farther. What do you want here?" Philemon demanded, placing himself in front of Isolde. "I've come to claim what is mine," the colonel replied, his eyes fixed on Isolde's swollen belly. "And it seems she owes me even more now." Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Samuel Whitaker, who had grown genuinely fond of the hard-working couple, stepped forward with a grave expression. "What's the meaning of this?" The settlement leader asked. Ashford smirked with malice. "These two are fugitives. She robbed me and fled on the eve of our wedding. He sheltered her, lost his farm to cover her debts, and now they live in unlawful cohabitation." Gasps of shock and indignation rippled through the neighbors. Philemon felt the world crumble beneath him once again. After months of building an honest reputation, the past had returned to destroy everything. "That's not true," Isolde protested, her voice trembling. "I fled a forced marriage and wed this man out of love." "Wed where? When? With what authority?" Ashford sneered. "There is no legal record of this union anywhere." Samuel Whitaker looked to Philemon, confused. "Is that true?" Philemon bowed his head, unwilling to lie to the man who had taken them in. "We married before God, but not before the law," he admitted. The murmurs among the neighbors grew louder. In the conservative mindset of the time, a union without the official blessing of church or law was branded sinful cohabitation. That was when Mrs. Thompson, the respected midwife of the community, stepped forward. "So what if they didn't sign papers?" she declared firmly. "I've lived long enough to know true love when I see it. These two love each other, work honestly, and help their neighbors. That's worth more than 1,000 stamped documents." "Exactly," agreed Mr. Cartwright, one of the oldest settlers. "In 8 months here, I've never seen a couple more united or hard-working." Other neighbors added their voices, recalling how Isolde had nursed their sick children, how Philemon had stepped in to help with harvests when men were injured, how the couple had woven themselves into the fabric of the community. Ashford saw the tide turning against him and changed tactics. "Touching all of this," he said sarcastically. "But the law is the law. She owes me $200 plus interest. If they can't pay, she comes with me to settle the debt." "Never!" Philemon thundered. And then something unexpected happened. Samuel Whitaker pulled a leather pouch from his coat and began counting money. Others followed his lead. Within minutes, a small fortune lay on a makeshift table in the yard. "Here is your $200. Samuel said. "The community pays the debt. Now leave and don't." "Come back." Ashford was speechless. He had not expected an entire community to rally behind two outsiders. "You don't know who you're crossing," he threatened. "Oh, we know," Mrs. Thompson snapped. "We're crossing a man who forces women into marriage and hunts down expectant mothers. Shame on you." The community's support moved Philemon and Isolde to tears. Isolde clutched her belly as though shielding the child within from the tension. Ashford, surrounded by hostile and determined faces, realized he had underestimated the strength of human solidarity. Reluctantly, he pocketed the money and cast one final look at Isolde. "You could have had everything," he said bitterly. "Wealth, status, comfort. Instead, you chose this meager life." "I chose happiness," she replied simply. "Something you will never understand." Ashford climbed into his carriage and left without looking back, leaving only a cloud of dust and the echo of his defeat. When silence returned, Isolde collapsed into Philemon's arms, sobbing with relief and gratitude. Neighbors gathered around, embracing them as though they were family. "How can we ever repay you?" Philemon asked, his voice breaking. "You already have," Samuel answered, "with honest work, true friendship, and your example of love. That's how a community works. We all take care of one another." 3 weeks later, on a sunny morning in January of 1849, Isolde gave birth to a baby girl. The labor was difficult, but Mrs. Thompson guided her with practiced skill. When the child's cry filled the small cabin, Philemon felt his life had become complete. "She's perfect," he whispered, cradling his daughter in his huge, trembling arms. "Just like her mother." They named her Hope in honor of the settlement that had sheltered them and the feeling that had guided their lives since the day they met. The little girl grew strong and healthy, surrounded by her parents' unconditional love and the care of the entire community. 5 years. Later, the wooden cabin had grown into a thriving homestead. At 63, Philemon remained vigorous, having expanded his fields and built a small mill that served the whole region. Isolde, now 35, radiated the serenity of a fulfilled woman, dividing her time between raising their daughter, tending the famed garden she had nurtured, and helping other women in the settlement. Hope, at 5, was a joyful and curious child, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's quiet determination. She ran across the fields like a free sparrow, beloved by all the neighbors who had witnessed her birth and growth. One golden autumn afternoon, the family sat together on the porch of their expanded, well-kept home when they saw a familiar carriage coming up the lane. It was Samuel Whitaker, but he was not alone. Beside him sat a younger man, well-dressed, whom Philemon did not recognize. "Good afternoon, friends," Samuel called, his usual warm smile in place. "I've brought someone who wished to meet you." The young man stepped down from the carriage with some timidity. "Allow me to introduce myself," he said. "I am Gabriel Ashford, son of Colonel Jonathan Ashford." Philemon and Isolde exchanged tense looks, but Gabriel raised his hands in peace. "I have not come to stir trouble, but to ask forgiveness in my family's name," he continued. "My father died last year, and among his papers I found all the correspondence about you. I was ashamed of how he treated you." Isolde gripped Philemon's hand, uncertain. "I brought this," Gabriel said, offering a small velvet box. "These are the jewels my father claimed were stolen. I discovered he purchased them only to accuse you of theft. They were never family heirlooms." Isolde opened the box and recognized the earrings and necklace she had once carried when she fled. "I have no need of these," she said, closing the box and handing it back. "I have treasures far more precious now." She looked to Philemon and to Hope, who was chasing butterflies in the yard. But Gabriel insisted. "Please accept them, and also this." He handed over a folded deed. "This is the original property that was once yours. My father lost it, gambling, and I reacquired it to return it to you." Philemon took the papers in trembling hands. It was indeed the deed to the farm that had belonged to his family for generations. "Why are you doing this?" Isolde asked. "Because I realize that the love you built is worth more than all the wealth my father ever amassed through cruelty," Gabriel replied. "He died bitter and alone. You've built a family, a community, a legacy of kindness. That is true wealth. Philemon looked down at the deed, then at the house they had built with their own hands, at the community that had welcomed them, and at the wife and daughter who were his entire world. "Thank you," he said at last. "But our life is here now. This deed—" He calmly tore the document in half. "It no longer represents who we are." Gabriel smiled with admiration. "I understand, and I envy you for it." That night, after their visitors departed, Philemon and Isolde sat together on the porch as they did every evening, gazing at the stars and listening to the soft breathing of Hope, asleep in the next room. "Any regrets?" he asked, repeating the same question he had posed 5 years earlier. "None," she answered, entwining her fingers with his. "We built a love that changed not only our lives, but touched the heart of an entire community." "What more could a woman ask for?" Philemon kissed her gently on the forehead. There on that simple but welcoming porch, with their daughter safe in bed and the future shining as brightly as the stars overhead, he realized he had found more than love. He had found redemption. The storm that had brought Isolde to his door had not been just passing weather. It had been the herald of a new season in his life, a season of growth, of blossoming, and of an abundant harvest of happiness. And as the night wind whispered through the trees around their home, carrying the fragrance of Isolde's garden flowers, Philemon knew that the lonely farmer had died on that stormy night 5 years earlier. In his place, a whole man had been born, a devoted husband, a proud father, and above all, a man who had learned that it is never too late to begin again when one has the courage to truly love. Like a seed that finds fertile ground after a storm. Sometimes the greatest loves are born in the most unexpected moments. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, tell us, do you believe it's never too late to find true love?